Must be overwhelming, standing here among us. The patron's smirk widened, his words laced with feigned politeness. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, yet the weight of unspoken judgment hung heavier than the decor. Barack Obama, ever composed, met the remark with a knowing smile. A hush settled over the room. Eyes darted between the two men. Would he let the insult slide? Or was this the moment he'd remind them exactly who he was? What would you do if someone questioned your achievements in front of a crowd? Comment where you're watching from. Like and subscribe for more legendary moments. The Gala was a testament to power and influence, held in one of Washington, D.C.'s most iconic venues. Grand marble pillars lined the expansive hall, leading to vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate carvings and glittering chandeliers that bathed the room in golden light. The soft hum of a string quartet underscored the polite chatter of attendees, a mix of policymakers, philanthropists, and influential figures. Their conversations revolved around social justice, but the tone carried an air of detachment, topics discussed out of obligation rather than passion. Barack Obama stepped into this world of grandeur, his sharp suit blending seamlessly with the sea of elegant attire. Yet his presence carried a different weight, an energy that commanded attention. To many, he was a symbol of progress, a man who had redefined the boundaries of possibility. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a feeling that not all in attendance welcomed the representation he brought to the room. Whispers mingled with the hum of the music, and stolen glances revealed a quiet resistance to his presence. The atmosphere buzzed with a mix of admiration and unease, signs of the storm that was yet to come. Barack entered the hall with the quiet dignity of someone who had walked this path before. His smile was warm but reserved, a reflection of his nature, a man deeply aware of the expectations placed upon him. As he greeted a few familiar faces, his thoughts momentarily drifted to his journey. He remembered his childhood, the boy who often felt out of place, but learned to stand tall. He thought of his mother's unwavering belief in his potential and the long nights spent reading under dim light, imagining a world where his voice could matter. The challenges he faced growing up, stereotypes, moments of exclusion, and systemic barriers, had shaped him into the man he was today. Now, as he moved through the crowd, those memories mingled with the weight of the present. Each handshake, each nod of recognition reminded him of the duality of his role, an individual and a symbol of change. He had fought to earn his place in rooms like this, where power and privilege converged, but he knew that not everyone saw him as an equal. In a room where polished smiles often masked prejudice, Barack felt the familiar weight of judgment. Yet, he stood tall, exuding a confidence that came not from the acceptance of others, but from his own sense of purpose. A purpose rooted in the belief that progress was worth every struggle. Lawrence Baines stood near the center of the hall, his presence commanding attention in a way that seemed effortless. A longtime donor to various social justice causes, he was known for his eloquence and charm, traits that allowed him to navigate rooms like this with ease. To the untrained eye, he was the epitome of a well-intentioned philanthropist, someone who spoke passionately about equality and progress. But to those who paid closer attention, there was an edge to his words, a calculated undertone that betrayed his true nature. "Ah, Barack," Lawrence greeted with an overly warm smile, his voice carrying just the right mix of familiarity and condescension. "It's always impressive to see someone rise above their circumstances, truly inspiring." The words, though wrapped in a guise of praise, struck like a dagger. Those close enough to hear them shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others exchanging knowing glances. Lawrence's polished demeanor made it difficult to call him out directly, but his intent was clear to those who knew how to listen. For Lawrence, this gala wasn't about celebrating social justice. It was about maintaining the illusion of progress while keeping the status quo intact. His subtle malice wasn't directed solely at Barack. It represented something far larger, the systemic barriers that continue to exist, even in spaces that claim to champion change. He was a reminder that progress was often met with resistance from those who benefited most from inequality. Yet Barack remained calm, his expression betraying none of the sting he felt. He had faced men like Lawrence before, and he knew that their power lay not in their words, but in the reactions they provoked. In the midst of the tension, Michelle Obama's presence was a grounding force. She stood a step behind Barack, her steady gaze sweeping the room. She could sense the undertones of judgment, the whispers that followed her husband like shadows. But she also knew him better than anyone else, the man who had faced countless obstacles with unwavering resolve. "Don't let him get to you," Michelle whispered as they moved through the crowd. Her tone was calm but firm, a quiet reminder of the strength he carried within. "They're just testing you, but you've been here before. Remember why you're here?" Her words were not just encouragement, they were a call to focus on the bigger picture. Michelle had always been his partner in the truest sense, not just in love, but in purpose. She saw the weight he carried and made it her mission to lighten it, even if only with a quiet word or a reassuring touch. For Barack, her presence was a reminder of his greater purpose. It wasn't about winning over people like Lawrence. It was about inspiring those who believed in the possibility of change. Michelle's strength became his own, and together they stood firm, ready to face whatever the evening would bring. Among the elegantly dressed guests sat Sophia Miller, a young activist with a notebook tucked into her lap. She was there not as a mere observer, but as someone deeply inspired by Barack Obama's legacy. To her, he was more than a former president. He was the embodiment of hope, proof that resilience could overcome systemic barriers. Sophia's own journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in a small town where prejudice ran deep, she had faced constant reminders that her dreams were too big, her voice too insignificant. But Barack's story had lit a fire within her. Through his speeches and actions, she found not just inspiration but validation, that she too could make a difference. As she watched Barack navigate the room with grace, even in the face of whispers and skepticism, her admiration deepened. He wasn't just attending the gala, he was standing tall in a space where many would falter. Sophia clutched her notebook tightly, determined to remember every detail. For her, this wasn't just an evening. It was a lesson in courage, a reminder that the fight for justice required strength and composure, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As Barack moved through the crowd, the room's lively chatter and faint clinking of glasses became a distant hum. He found himself slipping into his own thoughts, a quiet reflection of the journey that had led him here. Every step through the grand hall felt symbolic, a reminder of how far he had come and how much further there was to go. He thought back to his childhood, to moments that had shaped him. He recalled sitting in classrooms where teachers failed to call on him, assuming he had nothing valuable to contribute. He remembered the polite smiles that masked discomfort, the moments when he felt invisible. There was the neighbor who crossed the street when they saw him coming, and the countless strangers who commented, sometimes too casually, on his name or heritage. Each instance had left a mark, small but cumulative, shaping the quiet resilience he carried today. But Barack's reflections didn't stop with the struggles. His mind shifted to the moments of triumph, the ones that proved to him and to others that barriers could be overcome. He recalled the first time he addressed a crowd, feeling the nervous tremble in his voice transform into conviction as the audience leaned in, listening intently. He remembered the day he stood with his hand on The Bible, taking the oath of office, the weight of history pressing down on him and lifting him up all at once. And then there were the letters, thousands of them, from strangers who saw in his journey a reflection of their own dreams. In this room of power and privilege, those memories of doubt and triumph collided. He felt the familiar duality of his position, celebrated by some, resented by others. His presence at the gala wasn't just symbolic, it was a challenge to the status quo, a testament to perseverance. As he scanned the room, his gaze fell on faces that told contrasting stories. Those who admired him with silent respect, those whose judgment was thinly veiled, and those who avoided meeting his eyes altogether. These observations didn't dishearten him. Instead, they strengthened his resolve. In a world still grappling with systemic inequality, Barack understood that his role was bigger than himself. He was not merely a participant in this event. He was a symbol of hope and the relentless pursuit of justice. Have you ever been in a moment where someone underestimated you, not for your abilities, but because of who you are? Maybe it was your background, your appearance, or the values you stood for. How did you respond in that moment? Did you stay silent, or did you find the courage to show them your worth? Share your story. We'd love to hear how you handled it. Lawrence Baines stood near the buffet table, his presence magnetic yet unsettling. His smile, wide and deliberate, was as polished as the silver platters lining the table. Spotting Barack across the room, he made his way over, a wine glass balanced in one hand and a calculated look of curiosity in his eyes. "Ah, Mr. Obama," Lawrence greeted, his voice smooth yet laced with a subtle edge. "I've always admired how opportunistic certain individuals can be. It's quite a skill to navigate the complexities of politics, isn't it?" The remark was delivered with the veneer of a compliment, but Barack could hear the underlying insinuation. Lawrence wasn't acknowledging his skills or intellect. Instead, he was questioning the legitimacy of his success, as if Barack had stumbled into greatness by sheer luck or manipulation. Barack offered a measured smile. "It's true. Politics does require navigating complexities," he replied evenly. "But I've always believed that perseverance and purpose go hand in hand." Lawrence chuckled, as if amused by the response. Of course. But it must be daunting at times, being such a unique figure in spaces like this. Surely it takes a bit of adjustment." The comment hung in the air, its thinly veiled meaning unspoken, yet glaringly obvious. Several nearby guests, who had been discreetly listening, exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Barack felt the sting of the words, but remained calm. He had encountered men like Lawrence before, those who cloaked their prejudice in civility, making it harder to confront directly. He met Lawrence's gaze, his voice steady. "I've found that when you focus on the work, everything else tends to fall into place." Lawrence smiled again, his expression unreadable, before taking a sip of his wine and shifting the conversation to safer topics. But the damage had been done. The subtle insult lingered, a reminder of the biases that persisted even in rooms claiming to celebrate progress. The evening's highlight was a panel discussion featuring prominent voices in social justice, with Barack Obama as the keynote speaker. The stage was set with plush chairs and soft lighting, the audience eagerly awaiting insights from the distinguished panelists. Among them sat Lawrence Baines, positioned strategically at the opposite end from Barack, his expression one of smug confidence. The discussion began smoothly, with panelists sharing thoughts on progress, policy, and the challenges of achieving true equality. Barack, ever composed, spoke eloquently about the importance of grassroots movements, education, and community leadership. His words drew nods and murmurs of approval, a stark contrast to Lawrence, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. That silence didn't last long. "Mr. Obama," Lawrence interjected, leaning forward with an air of feigned curiosity, "you've certainly had a remarkable career. But I've often wondered, do you believe your success is a testament to your individual merit, or perhaps a reflection of the circumstances and timing that allowed you to rise?" The room fell still. The question, though posed politely, was a direct challenge to Barack's accomplishments, subtly suggesting that his achievements were less about capability and more about opportunity. It was a line drawn in the sand, an unspoken claim that his presence was owed to factors beyond his control. Barack paused, feeling the weight of the moment. His initial instinct was to deflect, to maintain the decorum expected of him. But the sting of Lawrence's words dug deeper, amplified by the attentive eyes of the audience, some of whom nodded in subtle agreement. "Timing and opportunity matter," Barack began, his voice calm but firm. "But so do preparation, hard work, and the willingness to step into uncomfortable spaces. Success isn't handed to anyone, it's earned." Lawrence smiled thinly, as if amused by the response. "Certainly," he replied, his tone suggesting otherwise. "But surely being a trailblazer has its unique advantages, wouldn't you agree?" The insinuation was clear. Barack's race, not his abilities, had defined his path. A low murmur rippled through the audience, a mix of discomfort and unspoken agreement. Barack straightened, meeting Lawrence's gaze head-on. "Advantages come from perspective, Mr. Baines, and I've learned that those who face the steepest climbs often see the clearest views." The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Barack's words carried strength, but Lawrence's overt disrespect lingered, leaving a mark that could not be ignored. As Lawrence's words lingered in the air, Barack felt a wave of memories crashing over him, vivid and unrelenting. He was no longer seated at the Gala. Instead, his mind carried him back to a classroom where a teacher had all but dismissed him. "Barack," the teacher had said, her tone clipped and impatient, "perhaps you'd do better with simpler material." She didn't even glance up from her desk as she handed him the paper, red marks slashed across his work. He remembered the shame he felt, the quiet humiliation of being judged not by his intellect, but by the assumptions made about him. The scene shifted. He was on a debate stage, his words measured and precise, but his opponent's dismissive smirk cut through the applause he had earned. "Well, it's easy to talk about ideals when you've never had to make the tough decisions," the opponent had said, reducing his experiences to mere rhetoric. The audience had laughed then, and Barack had stood there fighting to steady himself, and then there were the countless, subtler moments, the sideways glances in elevators, the soft-spoken comments at fundraisers, the assumptions about his upbringing, his abilities, his place in the world. These instances, seemingly insignificant on their own, had accumulated over the years, forming a heavy burden that he carried silently. In the present, as he sat at the Gala, those memories pressed against him, threatening to erode the composure he worked so hard to maintain. He thought about the years spent trying to prove himself, not just as an individual, but as a representative of something larger, a challenge he never asked for, but couldn't escape. Doubt began to creep in, as it always did in moments like this. Had things truly changed, or was his presence here just another performance, tolerated but not fully accepted? The weight of systemic prejudice loomed large, casting a shadow over the progress he had fought so hard to achieve. But even as the doubt tried to take root, something deeper stirred within him, a quiet resolve. These memories, though painful, were also a reminder of his resilience. He had been here before, and he had overcome. The past, however heavy, would not define the moment. Barack sat quietly, the clamor of the gala fading into a distant hum as his thoughts swirled with memories and doubt. Lawrence's words still lingered, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the facade of civility the evening was meant to uphold. His face remained composed, a calm exterior that he had mastered over years of facing adversity. But Michelle, seated beside him, knew better. She saw the faint tension in his jaw, the subtle way his fingers pressed tightly against his palm. She had seen this before, the silent weight he carried, not just as a man, but as a symbol. To so many, he was hope personified, a reminder that change was possible, but that hope came at a cost. It meant carrying not only his own identity, but the expectations of countless others who looked to him as proof that barriers could be broken. The sting of Lawrence's remarks wasn't just personal. It was systemic, a reminder of how far the world still had to go. Michelle leaned slightly toward him, her presence grounding as she placed a gentle hand on his arm. The touch was light, yet steady, a quiet reassurance that had always been her strength. "Hey," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute, "don't let him get to you. This isn't about him." Barack turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. She held his gaze, offering no judgment, no disappointment in his reaction to the insult, only a deep understanding and unwavering belief in him. Her presence alone was a reminder that he wasn't facing this moment alone. "You've faced worse," Michelle continued, her tone steady, unshaken. "And every time you've risen above it. This moment isn't about proving anything to him or anyone else. It's about showing everyone here what real leadership looks like. They need to see that." Her words cut through the fog of doubt that threatened to take root in his mind. She wasn't asking him to fight back, to meet Lawrence's malice with anger. She was reminding him of the power of his restraint, the strength in staying true to himself, and the values he represented. Barack inhaled deeply, letting her words settle. He gave her a small nod, his expression softening ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the strength she had lent him. Yet again, her quiet encouragement had pulled him back to the moment, sharpening his focus on what truly mattered. Michelle had always been his anchor, the steady force that kept him grounded in the face of chaos. She had an uncanny ability to see the bigger picture, to remind him of the purpose behind his actions. This moment wasn't about Lawrence's insults or the judgment of the room. It was about the countless individuals who would hear of this night and look to him for courage. Barack straightened his posture, his resolve hardening once more. With Michelle's reassurance, the doubt that had momentarily clouded his mind dissipated, replaced by a renewed determination to lead by example. This wasn't just a personal battle, it was a lesson in grace, a testament to the strength required to inspire change. The room, once filled with the hum of polite chatter and clinking glasses, now felt unnervingly quiet. Lawrence's remarks had landed, their sharp edge cutting through the gala's carefully maintained decorum. Yet no one spoke. The silence was deafening, a weight that hung over the room, leaving everyone uncomfortably aware of what had just happened. Some attendees avoided Barack's gaze, their eyes darting to their drinks or the floor as if pretending not to notice would absolve them. Their discomfort was evident, but their unwillingness to confront the situation spoke louder than words. These were people who prided themselves on supporting justice, donors to causes, champions of policies. But now, when faced with a moment to stand against prejudice, they faltered. Across the room, a few others exchanged knowing smirks, their expressions betraying a quiet agreement with Lawrence. They didn't need to say anything. Their subtle nods and satisfied glances were enough to validate his behavior. These were individuals who saw no problem in Lawrence's remarks, perhaps even viewing them as a bold truth rather than an insult. Then there were those who simply froze, their faces betraying no emotion at all. They represented the largest group, the Silent majority. These were the people who believed they had no part to play, no responsibility to intervene. Their inaction wasn't born of malice, but of fear, apathy, or complacency. Barack scanned the room, taking in the spectrum of reactions. He recognized this silence. It was one he had encountered countless times before. It was the silence that allowed prejudice to thrive, the quiet complicity that reinforced systemic injustice. But even amid the silence, there were glimmers of something else. A young man near the back shifted uncomfortably, his eyes filled with conflict, as if wrestling with whether or not to speak. An older woman placed her hand over her heart, her expression one of quiet disapproval. And then there was Sophia, sitting near the edge of the room, her hands clenched into fists. Her face reflected a mix of anger and helplessness, her gaze fixed firmly on Barack. The silence wasn't just a void, it was a mirror, reflecting the broader societal struggle to confront injustice. In that moment, Barack knew that how he responded wouldn't just define the evening, it would challenge everyone in the room to reconsider their role in the face of prejudice. Sophia sat near the edge of the room, her hands resting tightly in her lap, the fabric of her dress crumpling under her clenched fists. She had come to this gala with high hopes, eager to see one of her greatest inspirations, Barack Obama, speak about the importance of justice and equality. But now, watching Lawrence's subtle but cutting remarks and the room's muted response, her optimism was beginning to waver. The scene before her was disheartening. She had spent years fighting for social justice, often facing indifference and veiled hostility herself. But tonight was different. Here was Barack, someone she saw as a beacon of hope, being disrespected so openly. What stung more was the silence that followed. The attendees, many of whom claimed to champion the very causes she fought for, seemed content to let the moment pass without challenge. Sophia's heart sank as she questioned whether the progress she had believed in was real. If someone like Barack, with all his achievements and integrity, could still face such treatment in a room like this, what did that say about the world she was fighting to change? Yet even as her doubt grew, she couldn't take her eyes off Barack. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, composed, yet deeply aware of the moment, that gave her pause. He hadn't lashed out or shrunk under the weight of Lawrence's words. Instead, he seemed to be carefully considering his next move. A small spark of hope flickered within her. Maybe, just maybe, he would rise above the humiliation and respond with the dignity and strength she had always admired in him. She needed him to, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever doubted whether change was possible. Lawrence's voice continued to fill the room, each word meticulously designed to diminish and provoke. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed his position insulated him from consequence. His tone carried an air of superiority as he made yet another pointed remark, this time questioning the depth of Barack's understanding of complex policy issues. Barack inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He had faced moments like this before, moments where he had to decide between silence and speaking out. The temptation to ignore Lawrence's remarks and move on was strong. It would be easier, less risky. But as his eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on Michelle's steady gaze and Sophia's tense expression, he knew that silence wasn't an option. This moment wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small, about the silent spectators who needed to see what standing up to prejudice looked like. Barack straightened his posture, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his chair. He turned his attention directly to Lawrence, his calm demeanor masking the fire within. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. "Mr. Baines," he began, addressing Lawrence directly, "for the first time, I found that those who question others' capabilities often do so because they misunderstand the strength it takes to endure challenges they've never faced themselves. The room grew even quieter. All eyes were on Barack now, his words resonating with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "I've learned," he continued, "that true progress doesn't come from easy circumstances or perfect timing. It comes from persistence, from standing firm in the face of doubt, and from refusing to let others define your worth." Lawrence's smirk faltered slightly. His attempt at a response caught in his throat. Barack shifted his gaze across the audience, his words now directed at everyone in the room. "We all have a responsibility to recognize the humanity in one another and to challenge the narratives that divide us. That's how we move forward, together." The tension in the room was palpable, but so was the shift in energy. Barack's words had landed not with anger, but with conviction, a testament to his resilience and unwavering commitment to justice. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your worth was questioned, not because of what you've done, but simply because of who you are? Maybe it was in a classroom, a workplace, or even among friends, moments where you had to fight harder than others to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. How did you rise above it? What gave you the strength to keep going when everything felt stacked against you? Was it the support of someone who believed in you, a deep sense of purpose, or perhaps a moment where you realized your own resilience? Share your experience. Your journey might inspire someone else who's feeling the same struggle today. The air in the room was thick with anticipation as Barack Obama rose from his chair. The once muted whispers and clinking glasses now ceased entirely, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to echo. All eyes followed him as he made his way to the podium, his every step deliberate and measured. Barack's face remained composed, his trademark calmness firmly in place. Yet beneath the surface, a storm of emotions churned, anger at the disrespect he had endured, frustration at the complicity of the room, and the weight of responsibility to rise above it all. This was no longer just a moment about him. It was about everyone watching, both in the room and beyond, who had ever felt the sting of prejudice or the burden of proving their worth. Reaching the podium, he paused for a brief moment, his hands resting lightly on its edge. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the mix of expressions, some uneasy, others expectant, and a few still skeptical. He noted Michelle's steady gaze, a silent source of strength, and Sophia's wide-eyed anticipation, her hope for something transformative shining through. Barack drew in a slow, deliberate breath, letting the tension in the room settle. He knew that this was his moment to reclaim control, not with anger or defensiveness, but with purpose. As he opened his mouth to speak, his voice carried a calm authority that immediately commanded attention. "This evening," he began, his words deliberate and measured, "is a celebration of progress, of justice, and of the resilience that drives us forward. But it's also a reminder of how far we still have to go." In that instant, the narrative shifted. The room, once steeped in tension and uncertainty, began to lean into his presence, his poise setting the tone for what was to come. Barack took a moment, letting the silence settle, before his voice broke through with quiet strength. "Progress is a curious thing," he began, his tone calm yet purposeful. "It's not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's messy, and sometimes it comes from standing in places where you're not always welcomed." The words hung in the air, deliberate and pointed, though he never mentioned Lawrence by name. He continued, his gaze sweeping the audience, engaging everyone in the room. "I've been fortunate in my life, but fortune is only part of the story. There have been moments when I've been underestimated, moments when people looked at me and didn't see potential, didn't see capability. only difference. Barak paused, his eyes resting briefly on a cluster of attendees who had exchanged knowing smirks during Lawrence's remarks. Their expressions now shifted, tinged with discomfort. "I remember being in classrooms," he said, "where teachers didn't expect much from me. I remember walking into meetings where my presence seemed to surprise people as though I didn't belong. And I remember debates where my words were judged not on their merit, but on the person delivering them." The room grew heavier with each word, the audience leaning in, compelled by the weight of his stories. Barak's tone remained steady, but his words carried an undeniable force, making it impossible to dismiss the truth behind them. "But here's what I learned," he continued, his voice firm. "Those moments, those quiet, sometimes cutting moments of doubt, they're not the end of the story. They're the beginning. They're the push to work harder, to persevere, to show that the barriers we face don't define us." A murmur rippled through the room, subtle but growing, as Barak's words resonated with those who had experienced similar struggles or had perhaps even contributed to them. Barak shifted his gaze toward the crowd, ensuring his words reached every corner of the room. "We are all more than the assumptions made about us. And when we recognize that in ourselves and each other, that's when real progress begins." The subtle power of his message was undeniable. It wasn't defensive or combative. It was a graceful dismantling of prejudice, delivered with the poise of someone who had walked this path before. Barak's voice grew stronger, carrying an unmistakable sense of conviction. His tone shifted from personal reflection to a broader universal truth. "What I've come to understand," he said, his gaze steady as it moved across the room, "is that progress, real, meaningful progress, requires more than resilience. It requires unity. It requires all of us, no matter where we come from, to stand together against the forces that seek to divide us." The room, captivated by his words, seemed to lean in as he continued. "We cannot dismantle prejudice or inequality by ignoring it, nor can we challenge systemic barriers by standing on the sidelines. It takes courage to confront these forces head-on, to look within ourselves and ask, what role do I play? Am I contributing to the solution, or am I complicit in the problem?" The tension in the room shifted as his words resonated with different audiences in different ways. For some, they were a reminder of their own experiences with adversity. For others, they were a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about their silence or complicity. Barak paused briefly, allowing his message to settle. Then he pressed forward, his tone rising with purpose. "But here's the good news. We all have the power to be part of the change. It starts in moments like this, when we choose to listen, to learn, and to speak out when it matters most. It starts when we acknowledge the humanity in one another and recognize that our differences don't make us weaker. They make us stronger." His words were no longer just a response to Lawrence. They were a call to action for everyone in the room. History has shown us what happens when we stand together. Movements are built, barriers are broken, and lives are transformed. But those changes don't come without effort, without discomfort, and without courage. They come when we refuse to accept the world as it is, and instead imagine the world as it could be. Barak's voice softened as he concluded, the weight of his message, leaving an indelible mark on the room. Unity isn't just a lofty idea, it's a responsibility, and it's one we all share. As Barak's final words echoed across the hall, a palpable shift swept through the room. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward stillness of discomfort, it was something deeper. It was the weight of self-reflection, of being challenged to look inward. A woman seated near the front dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. For her, Barak's words had struck a personal chord, reminding her of moments she had ignored injustices because it was easier than confronting them. Beside her, a young man sat rigid, his jaw tight as though wrestling with his own thoughts. Throughout the room, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the veneer of polite indifference beginning to crack. For some, the reflection in Barack's words was a mirror they weren't ready to face. Others, however, found themselves moved, not just by the vulnerability in his stories, but by the strength he carried in delivering them. At the center of it all sat Lawrence Baines. His once confident smirk had faded, replaced by a strained expression as he attempted to maintain composure. But the atmosphere had changed, and the smug armor he wore so proudly was now glaringly out of place. Every word Barack had spoken felt like a spotlight, illuminating the prejudice Lawrence had tried to disguise as charm. Lawrence's hand tightened around the stem of his wineglass, his knuckles whitening. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His usual weapon, his polished rhetoric, suddenly felt hollow in the face of the truth that had been laid bare. The room no longer looked to him as a voice of authority. Instead, he was met with quiet scrutiny, his facade exposed. Barack's eyes briefly met Lawrence's, not with anger or triumph, but with calm acknowledgement. It wasn't a confrontation meant to humiliate. It was a moment of clarity that left no room for denial. The audience began to stir. Some offered polite applause, while others stood silently, visibly moved by the speech. The mood was no longer one of passive observation, but of engagement, as if Barack's words had reached beyond the walls of the gala to touch something far more profound. This wasn't just a turning point in the evening, it was a moment of reckoning. For everyone present, Barack stood tall at the podium, his voice resonating with a quiet but unyielding strength as he delivered his closing words. Change doesn't come from staying silent. It doesn't come from looking the other way. It comes from standing up, speaking out, and refusing to let hate win. Tonight, we have a choice. Not just to reflect, but to act, to build a world that celebrates our differences rather than divides us because of them. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, connecting with as many people as possible. This isn't just about speeches or symbols. It's about how we treat each other when the cameras are off, when no one else is watching. That's where justice lives, in the quiet decisions we make every day to be better, to do better, for each other. The room was silent, every word hanging in the air like an unspoken challenge. Barack took one final breath, grounding himself before delivering his final thought. Progress isn't easy. It never has been. But the question isn't whether it's possible. The question is whether we are brave enough to choose it together. For a moment, the silence deepened, as if the weight of his words had rendered the room breathless. And then it began. A slow clap, tentative at first, then growing steadily. Soon the entire room was on its feet, the applause echoing off the grand walls of the gala hall. Michelle smiled softly, her pride evident as she watched her husband stand there, calm and resolute amid the roaring ovation. She knew this wasn't just about the speech. It was about the integrity and strength he had shown in the face of disrespect. Sophia, seated near the back, felt a surge of emotion swell in her chest. The doubt she had felt earlier was now replaced by a renewed sense of hope. Watching Barack confront prejudice with such grace and courage reminded her why she had started fighting for change in the first place. Barack offered a small nod of gratitude to the crowd, his expression humble yet firm. This wasn't about accolades. It was about making a difference, and tonight he had reminded everyone in the room and beyond of what that difference could look like. Do you believe that words spoken with sincerity and strength have the power to change hearts and minds? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's words shifted a perspective, challenged an injustice, or sparked a sense of hope? Perhaps you've experienced this yourself, a time when a simple message made you see the world differently, or gave you the courage to take a stand? Share your thoughts or stories below. Your voice might be the inspiration someone else needs today. Echoes of the standing ovation lingered in the air, leaving behind a sense of collective introspection. The gala's organizers, seasoned professionals who had hosted countless events in the name of justice and equality, quickly realized that the night had taken a turn that could not be ignored. For all their meticulous planning, Lawrence Baines's behavior had cast a shadow over the evening, and they knew that silence would only deepen the damage. Gathered in a discreet corner of the hall, the organizers held a tense but purposeful conversation. "This is not just an awkward moment we can brush aside," one of the senior organizers, Margaret Hall, stated firmly. Her eyes scanned the room, resting momentarily on Barack, who stood at ease, engaged in conversation with a small group of guests. "If we let this go unchecked, we're complicit. We need to act." The others nodded in agreement, though some with hesitation. Lawrence wasn't just another guest. He was a significant donor, someone whose financial contributions had kept their initiatives afloat. Confronting him could have consequences. "What if he pulls his funding?" a junior organizer asked cautiously. Margaret's response was immediate and resolute. "If we're more concerned about losing his money than standing up for our principles, then what are we even doing here?" Her words cut through the hesitation, and the group quickly reached a consensus. Lawrence, who had been nursing his bruised ego near the bar, was approached by one of the lead organizers, Robert Sinclair. "Mr. Baines," Robert began, his tone professional but unyielding, "we need to discuss your comments from earlier." Lawrence's polished facade faltered for a brief moment before he offered a thin smile. "Of course. Though I'm not sure what you mean," he replied, feigning ignorance. Robert didn't waver. "Your remarks to Mr. Obama were inappropriate and undermined the values this event is meant to uphold. We've received feedback from several guests who were uncomfortable with what was said. As an organization committed to equality, we cannot overlook this." Lawrence's face hardened, but Robert continued, leaving no room for debate. "We'll be addressing this publicly to ensure our stance on inclusivity is clear. Your continued participation in future events will depend on your alignment with these principles." Later, as the evening drew to a close, Margaret took to the podium to address the audience. Her voice was calm but resolute, the kind of tone that commanded respect. "Tonight has been a powerful reminder of the work we still have to do. Accountability isn't just a word. It's an action, and it's one we are committed to taking. We have a responsibility to ensure that spaces like this reflect the values we claim to uphold: respect, inclusivity, and progress. We owe that to everyone here." The room erupted into applause, not as loud or thunderous as the ovation for Barack, but filled with a quiet sense of justice. The mood had shifted, the tone of the event reframed from discomfort to responsibility. This wasn't just a moment of reckoning for Lawrence. It was a message to everyone in the room that the fight for justice required action, even when it was difficult. As the evening wound down, guests began to disperse, their conversations now tinged with reflection and purpose. Sophia sat quietly at her table, watching as Barack moved through the crowd, his calm demeanor unchanged despite the evening's tensions. She clutched her notebook tightly, the pages filled with thoughts and fragments of inspiration she had scribbled during his speech. The fire that had dimmed in her earlier that night was now burning brighter than ever. Taking a deep breath, Sophia stood, weaving through the room until she found herself face to face with the man who had reignited her hope. "Mr. Obama," she began, her voice a mixture of nervousness and determination. Barack turned to her with a warm smile. "Please call me Barack," he said gently, sensing the weight of her emotions. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then pressed on. I just wanted to say thank you. Your words tonight. They reminded me why I started this fight in the first place. There are days when it feels impossible, when it feels like the world isn't changing fast enough or at all. But seeing how you handled tonight, hearing your story, it's made me realize that giving up isn't an option. Barack listened intently, his gaze steady and encouraging. I'm glad to hear that, Sophia, he replied. Change is never easy, and it's almost never quick, but every step you take matters, even when it feels like no one is watching, and the fact that you're here, that you're willing to stand up and speak out, that's how change begins. His words felt like a lifeline, pulling Sophia back from the edge of doubt. She nodded, her voice growing steadier. I've always looked up to you, but tonight, seeing you face what you did with such grace and strength, it reminded me that resilience isn't just enduring, it's finding a way to keep going no matter what. Barack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're absolutely right. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many people out there who share your vision. Keep pushing forward and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. As Sophia walked away, her heart felt lighter, her purpose clearer. Barack's words had reignited her determination, not just to fight for justice, but to do so with the same resilience and dignity he had shown. The gala had ended, leaving the grand hall eerily quiet. The golden chandeliers, which had sparkled brightly during the evening, now cast softer reflections across the empty room. Barack stood by a tall window, his silhouette framed by the glow of Washington, D.C.'s city lights. He held a glass of water in his hand, untouched, as his mind replayed the events of the night. Lawrence's words still echoed in his memory, sharp and deliberate, each one carrying the weight of an unspoken prejudice. Barack knew men like Lawrence, charming, calculated and deeply entrenched in their own worldview. His remarks weren't a mere lapse in judgment. They were a reflection of the systemic issues that had long plagued society. Tonight's confrontation, though subtle, was just one more reminder that the fight against racism was far from over. But Barack wasn't one to dwell solely on the negatives. His eyes shifted from the window to the empty seats that had, just hours ago, been filled with faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions. He thought about the woman in the front row who had wiped away tears as he spoke about resilience. He remembered the young man near the back, his expression softening as he seemed to grapple with his own biases. And then there was Sophia, whose eyes had shone with both frustration and hope, a young activist determined to keep pushing forward despite the odds. Progress wasn't linear, Barack reminded himself. It was messy, uneven, and often slow. For every step forward there were moments like tonight, moments that exposed the deep-rooted challenges still left to overcome. Yet those very moments were also opportunities. The discomfort they created could spark reflection, and reflection could lead to change. Barack's thoughts turned to the standing ovation. It wasn't just applause for his words. It was a collective acknowledgement of the truth he had spoken. That ovation had been a response to something larger, the courage it took to stand up, to address what many preferred to ignore, and to do. So with grace, he took a slow sip from the glass in his hand, letting the cool water ground him. The night had been a test of his resolve, and though it had its painful moments, it also reaffirmed his purpose. The fight for justice wasn't about grand gestures. It was about these incremental steps, these seemingly small moments that built towards something greater. As he placed the glass down on the windowsill, Barack felt a renewed sense of responsibility. His platform wasn't just a privilege. It was a tool, a bridge to reach those who needed hope and those who needed a nudge to reflect on their own roles in the world's injustices. The hall behind him was empty now, but the echoes of the evening lingered, carrying with them a quiet but profound message. The work was far from finished, but the progress, however small, was undeniable. Barack straightened his shoulders, his gaze steady as he looked out at the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had reminded him why every effort was worth it. The quiet of the evening enveloped Barack as he sat at the small desk in his hotel room. The glow of a dim lamp illuminated a leather-bound notebook, its pages well worn from years of thoughts, reflections, and lessons carefully documented. Tonight, the events of the gala weighed heavily on his mind, the echoes of applause and tension still lingering. He opened the notebook and picked up his pen, pausing for a moment before pressing it to the page. "It's not about the insults we face," he wrote in deliberate strokes, "but the strength with which we respond." The words felt like a summation of not just the night, but of countless moments in his life. Lawrence's comments had been sharp, cutting in a way that was both intentional and familiar. Yet Barack had long since learned that the power of such remarks lay not in their delivery, but in how they were received. The choice to rise above them, to respond with composure and purpose, was where true strength lay. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen lightly against his fingers as he reflected further. Speaking out against injustice had always been about more than just calling out the wrongs. It was about creating opportunities for transformation. Moments like these weren't just confrontations, they were crossroads where the possibility of change became real. He thought about the audience, the spectrum of reactions etched into their faces. Some had been moved to tears, their expressions reflecting a deep resonance with his words. Others had shifted uncomfortably, their complicity laid bare under the weight of his message. Then there was Lawrence, whose carefully constructed facade had cracked under the undeniable truth of the evening. But it wasn't Lawrence's discomfort that mattered. What mattered was the shift in the room, the realization that silence in the face of prejudice was no longer acceptable. Barack turned back to the notebook, his pen hovering over the page before he added another line. "Strength is not measured in how loudly we speak, but in the depth of what we say, and the change it inspires." He underlined the words, his pen pressing firmly into the paper. He allowed himself a small smile as he closed the notebook, his mind still reflecting on the power of the night. The events had been a test, not just of his composure, but of his ability to lead by example. It would have been easy to respond with anger or defensiveness, but he had chosen a different path, one that upheld dignity and inspired reflection. This night, like so many before it, reminded him why the work mattered. Change was not a single sweeping act, but a series of moments where people were challenged to see the world differently. And those moments, however fleeting, were the foundation upon which a more just society could be built. Barack rose from the desk, a renewed sense of purpose settling over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had reaffirmed his belief in the power of resilience, dialogue, and grace. The night of the gala had been a microcosm of a much larger story, a reflection of the battle against prejudice that countless individuals face every day. For Barack, it was yet another moment in a lifetime spent navigating spaces where he wasn't always welcomed, yet where he chose to stand tall regardless. As the evening faded into memory, the lessons of the night began to crystallize, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed the events unfold. Prejudice, as Barack knew all too well, was not something that could be eradicated with a single speech or a singular act of defiance. It was woven into systems, cultures, and everyday interactions. The fight against it required persistence, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of change. Lawrence Baines's comments had been a stark reminder of this reality, but they had also become an opportunity, a moment to transform pain into purpose, to inspire reflection and action. As Barak reflected on the evening, he understood that the true power of the night wasn't in the confrontation itself, but in the message it sent. It wasn't just about speaking out against one individual's prejudice. It was about challenging everyone in the room to examine their own biases and the roles they played in perpetuating or dismantling systemic inequality. The shift in the atmosphere, the visible discomfort and eventual applause was evidence that seeds of change had been planted. The lesson of the night was clear. Progress is made not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in the countless, seemingly small moments of courage that ripple outward. Barak's decision to address Lawrence's remarks with grace rather than anger had shown the room and the world that strength lies in dignity. That true power comes from standing firm in one's values without compromising humanity. For Sophia, the young activist who had struggled with doubt earlier in the evening, the night became a turning point. Watching Barak rise above the insults with such poise reignited her belief in the work she was doing. It reminded her that the path to justice was never easy, but always worth pursuing. She left the gala with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to carry forward the lessons she had witnessed firsthand. For the organizers of the gala, the night was a wake-up call. Lawrence's behavior and the decision to address it publicly became a symbol of accountability, a reminder that claiming to stand for justice means acting on those values, even when it's uncomfortable. Their statement at the end of the evening wasn't just an apology. It was a commitment to do better, to create spaces where everyone felt respected and included. And for Barak, the night served as both a challenge and a reaffirmation. He knew that the work ahead was immense, that the fight against prejudice would continue to test him and those who followed in his footsteps. But he also knew that moments like this, moments where dignity and grace triumphed over hate, were what made the struggle worthwhile. The gala had begun as a celebration of progress, but it ended as something more profound, a reminder of the power of resilience, the necessity of accountability, and the importance of unity in the face of division. It became a symbol of what could be achieved when individuals chose to confront injustice not with bitterness, but with resolve and hope. Barak left the gala that night with a quiet determination. The road to equality was long, but every step mattered. And as he looked out at the city lights one last time before retiring for the night, he carried with him the belief that the smallest acts of courage could ripple into the greatest waves of change. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone faced adversity head-on and turned it into a powerful triumph? Maybe it was a friend, a family member, or even a stranger who refused to let obstacles define them, rising above challenges with resilience and determination. What did that moment teach you? Did it change how you view your own struggles or inspire you to push forward in the face of difficulty? Share your story. Your experience could be the motivation someone else needs to see their own potential. If this story moved you, make sure to share it with someone who needs inspiration today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience.